This is FX Radio and I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook. And again with me in the studio today is none other than the preeminent Dr Mark Donohoe. Welcome, Mark.
It's good to be here again.
Mark, today we're going to be talking about quite a serious, I know we're sort of quite jovial in our approach, but we mean this when we say it's a very serious and horrible affliction, is chronic pain.
Yes, however, remembering having fun is one of the ways around chronic pain. So there's no contradiction here. Finding fun when you have chronic pain is one of life's toughest things to do. But weirdly, if you do find that fun, if you do find that joy, it has an amazingly powerful effect on depressing the experience of pain. So no harm having fun, it's just not at the expense of anybody.
Yeah. So tell me about, because you've got a lot of experience with chronic pain patients, fibromyalgic, chronic fatigue syndrome. Tell me, I think, first about this patient set, which, historically you've got a real name with this.
There's pain and there's pain.
Yep.
It's like oils and oils. There is pain, and some of it is traumatic, and it's bloody obvious why people have pain. They've broken something, they've injured something, and it's acute trauma. And in my view, medicine knows how to manage those pains really well. We have got potent drugs, we've got surgical techniques, we can repair stuff, and we can diminish pain of that acute variety. Where life becomes difficult is when the pain is of a different quality, where we don't understand the origins of it, where the pain persists over long periods of time. Then, like most things in medicine, what works acutely is very, very poorly extended for an infinite period of time or into the far distant future without plan B. Now, ideal in areas, as you say, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, a lot of the people that I see have this kind of neuritic pain. And so you see the FDA in America approving drugs which are like pregabalin, which have very specific effects to try and stop that nerve-type pain in the body. Again, it's a crude way of approaching it, because when you don't understand why the pain's there, you may fix the pain of fibromyalgia to some extent, but now you're on a medication which probably is not able to be just managed off into the future. So the lack of understanding of pain is one issue. And I think what we have to get back is to a bit of a deeper understanding. Pain is difficult. Why? Because it's perceived by the sufferer, and it is so difficult to get objective measures. And as we've talked about before, what do doctors love? They love objective measures of something. It doesn't matter whether that is pain or migraines. It doesn't matter what it is. We love to have a measure so that we can see when we do some good. Studies are hard on pain because it's all about perception. How do you do a blind trial of something?
How do you do champagne?
Yeah, very funny. Not just champagne. All the things that we think of, the work done in Australia just recently reviewing all the paracetamol literature, that shows that there is no good evidence that something that we all regard as a good pain reliever, when put in trials, doesn't actually relieve pain. And I know this myself. I have done this. I have pain. I am used to Panadol working. I realised years ago I had left Panadol in the glass, dissolved, and had failed to drink it, and my pain went away. It was the making of the Panadol. It was the rattling of the pack. It wasn't anything to do with the effect of the drug on my pain. So I deal with people where pain is a predominant symptom, and as their fatigue gets better, the pain, the fibromyalgic pain, or the muscle pain, joint pain, headaches, they're all part of chronic fatigue syndrome's case definition. Those persist, and they are very, very difficult to break, because you talk to a person about mindfulness. When you're in pain, mindfulness is a really, really difficult thing to do. We do know that mindfulness works, but getting into that state is the devil's own job.
Yeah.
So I do break this down a bit. There are types of pain that we can kind of categorize. One of them, what I would call inflammatory immunological pain, where we've got pretty good evidence, say, that the gut wall is inflamed or the liver is inflamed, and you're actually seeing changes in the biochemistry of the body, and you can say by inference, that's probably going to be painful, that's probably going to hurt. C-reactive protein is raised, there are markers of inflammation. And in those cases, I think the evidence in clinical practice is you move to inflammation control and you do a lot about pain.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we've got this nerve-related pain where probably part of the nerve centers of the brain are not doing the filtering job that they're meant to do. Maybe the nerves in the periphery are hyper-responsive. And they have very literal causes as well. If you drop B12 levels, for example, or people are poor methylators, they get hypersensitivity before they get the loss of sensation in the periphery. So nerve pain is not inflammation. It is the nerves giving the signal back to the brain and the brain being unable to filter those out. So I tend to divide them up that way. Then there is the vague and non-specific. I hurt all over.
Yeah.
And you press on them and it's not tender in any of those areas, but the whole body seems to be on fire. And now we've got building evidence oddly from MRI, a particular type of MRI scan, that can show the changes of neuroinflammation. And we've always thought of inflammation as swelling, redness. Doctors see it. We think of inflammation, ESRs raised, C-reactive proteins raised. Outside the brain, things swell. Inside the brain, when you get neuroinflammation, brains shrink because there's no room to swell. If the brain swelled, we would be having a very tough time.
Yeah.
And so that 90% of the brain is not neurons, it's glial cells forever controlling. Is there something toxic? Is there something injurious? Is something getting across the blood-brain barrier that should not be here? And so we're becoming aware that in those global pain syndromes, it's something about the perception happening in the central nervous system. We felt lost about it, but now that we've got markers of that, now that we can do SPECT scan imaging and MRI imaging and nuclear medicine imaging, and it's showing this brain shrinkage, it's not Alzheimer's, it's something that the brain does under inflammation when things get across, and that gives a pain syndrome for failure of filtering, if you like.
And that pain sensation, even though the pain centre is in the brain, the sensation can be in the peripheries.
Well, that's the point. Pain is felt not in the brain. The brain has no sensation of pain of itself. People have big tumours in the brain, don't experience a moment of pain from that tumour. So the brain is projecting out to where it imagines the pain is coming in from. In a lot of these pain disorders, we think that it's around the thalamus and around the filtering areas, so that sensations coming in from everywhere, including pain receptors. And most people have a filter system which says, below that level, not a problem. Really nothing there. And so sensations going on all the time, pain receptors are sending their messages, but if it doesn't reach a threshold, we regard ourselves as pain-free. Once it passes that threshold, we feel pain. Now, people drop their threshold as a result of damage to the brain. It sounds bad, but this is not damage of a permanent nature. It's not Alzheimer's or dopamine disorders or anything like that. This is just a loss of the filtering capacity, and now the brain gets overwhelmed with input, and people do experience it as overwhelm. Everything's on fire. A person yesterday, my hearing, I can't stop. The hearing hurts. Hearing doesn't technically hurt, but it does give the sensation of pain when it's unstoppable, when it can't be filtered out. So those divisions, could it be inflammation? Can we do something about inflammation? Is it the nerves just overfiring, super sensitive? Can we do something to settle the nervous system? And then with the more global type of syndromes, is there an inflammatory response going on in the brain? An example here that I give is, say you do have a leaky gut and then you add stress to it. You've got molecules getting across and into the circulation. Generally the brain keeps them out, but stress and cortisol changes that blood-brain barrier, and so now things are affecting the brain that push it into a state which it was not in before. And so you do see those people where one thing stacks up on the other, poor methylators, DQ genes, grains in the diet, and they keep it below the threshold for years, and then the final stressor just trips them over that edge, and after that they've entered a new state. It's a stable state of health and pain, but now we've got a new type of pain where we really have to go back to the brain and say, not can we knock you out with oxycodone, or not can we make sure that you don't feel anything with Valium, but can we settle the fire, that glutamate neuroinflammatory fire in the brain, can we turn it down and can we get you back below that threshold?
So it seems like, yet again, just like allergies, just like liver disease, that we've got a glass of beer, if you like. You have a sip of this and a sip of that, or a nip of this and a nip of that, or whatever, and you top up the glass until you reach a stage where it overflows. Yeah. And you only get the symptoms once you overflow. But all of these things are the antecedents, the things that add to that problem being presented. So what about things like leaky gut, like lipopolysaccharide issues?
Yeah. Well, I think truly if you ask people, Again, black and white medicine, when did the pain start? People can sometimes give you a date or say, here's where it happened. And we as doctors, we say, aha, bereavement, that's you must be stressed.
Yep.
But if you take the time, and this is one of the differences of my practice, I spend hours with people, if you take the time and say, what was happening in the year before that? People will tell the story of, I was getting all these gut problems and my skin was breaking out and my hair, I was losing hair. So you do get little bits of information about what they were adapting to, what they were losing in effect in resilience over that time. The story is one of loss of resilience, and then the final thing, the final insult, is what we all pay attention to. So we, as you say, with that drink, you pay attention to the last drink added. It wasn't the last drink.
Yeah.
It was all of the drinks before that kind of set the stage for that.
So let's now look into what sort of things we should be looking at as integrative practitioners to finally get that reduction, if you like, of the overflow. What sort of nips should we be taking out of that glass?
If people are presenting with pain, I think one thing that makes an enormous difference to patients when they come to see a practitioner is the confidence that you are going to take their pain seriously, not deny it because you can't see the reason why they have pain, but you're going to take the pain seriously and work with them to reduce that pain. It makes an unbelievable difference for a person to have confidence that they're not simply going to be ejected and say, here is your pain-relieving pill, go away and leave me alone. I think doctors especially fear pain. The problem is we have such blunt instruments to try and manage pain, and we're very, very aware now of what those blunt instruments cause in the future. We don't want to use the narcotics. We don't want to use the powerful pain relievers because they're a one-way street to a bad outcome. And so now as we're cutting it back, you'll have doctors saying, we have an integrative approach to pain. They don't actually know about it because what they're not thinking is, how do I divide this pain up? So my feeling is, if the person comes in and they've got the confidence that you're going to work through the details, you're going to identify the types of pain and work with them with strategies that are not going to be harmful and can be sustainable, then their pain starts to diminish after the first consultation. If then we can take that approach of why did the pain occur, not just was it the loss of a loved one, was it the loss of a dog, was it the kind of trip that you had when you were running, if we can take the broader approach of what was going wrong that would give us a clue about why the pain's there, then we go back to causes. And I think that's where we're at. We're very at our very best. If we can manage neuroinflammation, and there's lots of ways of doing that, if we can replenish B12 for people who say have got nerve-related pain, if we can do something for inflammation with the omega-3s or other powerful inflammation controllers, then we're thinking in categories, but they're broad enough and nutritional enough for them not to be drug therapies.
So let's look into some of these therapies. And I think the hero of pain, if you wanted a mineral, would be magnesium.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think that you can say that there's lots of calls for magnesium. Magnesium has parts to play in energy metabolism, in clearing lactate. I mean, one common thing in my world is the pain in the muscles on even minimal activity and night cramps. And it's something that gives you the hint that if this ATP were better, if the magnesium were available in higher amounts, lots would be finished. And truthfully, on almost every patient where there's musculoskeletal pain, before I've done any testing or anything, after the first consultation, I say, can we get you on to 300 to 600 milligrams of elemental magnesium? I want you just to see what happens with that while we go and do our testing. And my estimate would be maybe a third to a half of patients notice clear benefits with that within the first week. So a simple, practical mechanism of pain management is do something that improves that stops lactic acid buildup in the muscles, that improves neurotransmission, that restores nerve integrity and ATP production, and that counteracts the calcium. I mean, part of our problem these days is we've got very, very good, lots of older people on calcium supplements with no thought for magnesium at all. And the calcium goes higher and higher, and we're very happy about the bones probably being stable. And then we forget that there's another cation there that if we fail with it, eventually is going to raise its ugly head and cause pain, and cause muscle pain especially.
And then, of course, we can move on to the fatty acids.
We can, and so this is a shift. Magnesium is not much of an anti-inflammatory of its own accord. Magnesium stabilizes cell membrane, stabilizes neurotransmission, and so that'd be a good example of if we're looking for the nerves and muscles and the lactate and the Krebs cycle, then the magnesium and maybe CoQ10 sometimes with those people as well makes a big difference to the musculoskeletal type pain. If we're moving on to is there evidence for inflammation, then to me the preeminent ones are kind of curcumin and the omega-3 fats. We have natural anti-inflammatories in the omega-3s, the resolvins, protectins, things which actually clear up inflammation, see the resolution of that inflammation, and we need to be prepared to go relatively high dose. For people with pain, you often need to get up to maybe, in the standard old fish oil capsules, probably around about 12, 14 grams at a time. We've got so used to this thing, people say, oh no, I'm on fish oils. How many do you take? Oh, I take 1,000 milligram capsule once a day when I remember it. It hasn't done any good. Well, of course it's done no good. If you're after inflammation control, you have to have up around the 10 grams minimum. And I generally would say, look, if you've got around about 4 grams of the EPA plus DHA, if you just add those numbers up, and you've got over 4 grams intake a day and you can have 1 or 2 fish meals a week, then you're doing all I need to see what happens with the EPA, DHA and the omega-3s generally.
A newer player, not so new now, but certainly from my sort of practice, if you like, is krill oil. And what's interesting to me is of all the purported uses of krill oil, which I might add to the listeners, much of them are hanging on the shirt tails, hanging off the coat tails of the plethora of research done on fish oil, not krill. But one of the things that it's really gaining a market name for is the use in arthritic pain, osteoarthritic pain.
Yeah, and this is again comes back to the subtlety. What's the difference is we talk about EPA plus DHA, but there are other factors in all delivery methods. Food is not EPA, DHA. Food is the fish. Food is the grass-fed beef. It's the young lamb. And so when we get our EPA plus DHA, it's not usually in capsules. What we're talking about is therapeutic applications to up that. I do pay attention to people around the area that I work in. On a walk the other day, I heard a daughter telling her mother, oh, Mum, only old people are on fish oils. You've got to get on krill oil. It's like 100 times more potent, and so you only need 10 or 20 milligrams of that stuff in it. And that mindset of, how do you separate what's kind of groovy marketing talk? The EPA DHA is still the foundation of what we're after. There are other cofactors in there that we need to do independent research on and not just say, oh, because there is this other chemical that's 5 times more potency. This is rubbish. For most people, what they need is the EPA DHA. We know the effects that they have. If there are other factors, then we have to go and look at those separately. And I get irritated with krill oil because people drop effective high-dose fish oils, which is doing the job, come back and say, look, this isn't working anymore. And the story is they've changed to krill, which is expensive. And for the same EPA DHA dose, you're paying too much, so they go down in dose.
Yeah.
And that concerns me. I mean, clinically, that just is so many people who have dropped their dosage with bad outcomes, and they believe the marketing hype that this is magically different. It's not magically different, it's different.
It's different.
And
it
same
may
with
be better
calamari as well. There's going to be all kinds of sources. What we need to do is, for each newcomer, go and do the work.
Yeah.
Find out whether it does and what it does differently from the others. There'll be those subtle differences.
There is some evidence to show that, the phosphatidyl sort of complex, if you like, of the EPA and DHA in krill is better absorbed than just EPA, DHA. I get that. But it tends to be around that 4 times better absorbed. But as you say, the problem is the cost that you're paying for each dose may well be the same as the dose that you're paying for the fish oil.
That's right. And when you look at the milligram doses, no magic occurs.
No.
Stuff isn't made by these phosphatidyl groups. It is a method of absorption and nutrition. And again, we come back to, is it food? No. If it's not food, you may be taking artificially high doses to get around that gradient. We may not absorb things as well without the fish or without the food source.
Yeah. And I think one of the salient points for the possible use of krill might be, I get compliance. You're getting nice high dose krill oil supplements now. So that may be an issue, and certainly in those people that might have malabsorption issues.
Yeah, and if you've got a leaky gut, inflamed gut, if you've got gastrointestinal symptoms, which many have, the easier that you can make that, the better. I agree.
So let's go on to gut health because, for instance, glucosamine in the use of pain isn't first used. It's not taken as a package from your gut as glucosamine or chondroitin and given to your joint as such. Your gut uses glucosamine to heal itself first.
Yeah.
And it's changed N-acetylglucosamine as acetylated glucosamine. So tell me more about what you do with your fibromyalgia patients with their guts. What sort of work do you do with probiotics, with fibre, with diet?
I think this is the new stunning entry into the area of inflammation management especially, and maybe some of the neurogenic pain as well. So there's, the neurological pain, people with with abdominal pain, people who get bloating wind, pain, discomfort. You should focus on the gut anyway. But what is emerging from the microbiome project is that these bugs, the abnormal gut bugs, have an enormous amount to play in inflammation control and set off inflammation. So if you feed lots of sugars, you end up getting the energy harvesting bugs becoming dominant and, interestingly, triggering more of a pro-inflammatory response. There's lots of evolutionary biology behind this, but if you feed up one group of organisms and you drop your gastrointestinal, your gut bugs biodiversity, the genetic biodiversity, what you end up is pro-inflammatory bugs. The Nature study done last year with the French intervention did show that when you restore normality of the gut microbiome, C-reactive protein, markers of inflammation, things that every doctor regards as important, drop down. Obesity drops away. And so I think what we can say is the body will grab sugar. In the evolutionary world, it generally was a problem of not getting enough food. You didn't have animals getting so much food that they got fat and died of obesity-related issues. So in evolutionary terms, our job was to grab every bit of fuel that we could, even if it caused problems. And so in the summer months, before the hibernation, the winter and the lousy food supply came around, gathering energy and putting it into fat was a very positive thing. The cost of it, bit of inflammation, you can put up with in those times because otherwise health is good. That gets you through your winters. What do we not have now? We don't have winters anymore. We never have that point where the fallow fields of the gut go back and the energy harvesters die off and the other bugs take the dominant role in the gut. And that's what we saw in the Nature study, that gut biodiversity went up. It's 6 weeks of 35% restricted kilojoules and a focus on the protein and the fats.
Yeah.
So pull the sugars out and get that 6 weeks, get your gut biodiversity up, and you get pain relief in a lot of the people who do that. They feel better energy-wise, they're losing weight, but they don't hurt. So that focus on the gut has now got so many positives to it. If you ask most integrative practitioners, if you had one thing you could fix, some might say the brain, but nearly everyone would say, if I could get everyone's gut right, I would be magic. That would be better than any other thing that I was able to do for my patients, and it's the hardest thing to do.
What's really interesting is that this old naturopathic principle is now getting medically validated in so many different chronic diseases.
We call it different things, though, don't we? We don't call it, gut ecology. We call it microbiome, and that was invented in '99, and it became a big thing in 2004, and now it's a reinvention of what naturopaths and integrative therapists have been doing for centuries and centuries.
So let's look at other things that you might throw into that pot to try and look at dampening inflammatory cascades. So the prostaglandins, the cyclooxygenases, things like quercetin.
Yeah, the quercetin, the natural antihistamine it got called. They get the bioflavonoids that are there with the vitamin C's and with the fresh fruits. If you can bring those up, you can have aspirin-like effects of those. You can have a strong anti-inflammatory effect with those. I didn't even answer your question. Glucosamine is a really important anti-inflammatory. Yes, on the gut, it works out well because it has an anti-inflammatory effect there, but it is important just in general in the diet. So the dietary components of the quercetins, the essential fatty acids, especially the omega-3s, the bioflavonoids, they're really, really critical. And they're very, very easy to get. Dietary-wise, you've got to be prepared to go for the fresh fruit, but they're not expensive supplements either. So you can control a lot of the inflammatory processes which trigger pain responses. And on the inflammation side, that's why I'm going back to that division, inflammation on the gut, inflammation at the nerve endings, inflammation in the tissues around the place. That's a very useful focus. Problem is, it sometimes doesn't work out. Neurogenic pain, you've done everything you can for inflammation according to those good principles, and yet the nerves are still firing off. And so you still need to have something that you can come back to and say, what's the kind of things that can settle the nerves?
So tell me what you use there in neurogenic pain.
So in terms of neurogenic pain, the poor methylators, they're a really good, easy, low-hanging fruit. You can give them vitamin B12 shots or even, usefully absorbable sublingual vitamin B12. And over a period of a couple of months, the nerve responsiveness dampens down and normalizes. Getting them onto a good form of folate, not folic acid. What you don't want to do is add that, but getting onto a range of folates from the food, and then maybe folinic acid as the secondary one, gets them around that. And so restoring nerve function, B6 and zinc, really critical as well. So we have ways of approaching that, nerve inflammation in the periphery and nerve inflammation in the brain.
There seems to be this avoidance of in the undermethylators with folic acid.
Yeah, well, folic acid is the synthetic form of the many, many versions of folates, or folinic acid, 5-methylfolate. There's a bunch of them, and foods have dozens of varieties of folates of various types. It's a group of chemicals. It's not a chemical. What's cheap to make is folic acid, and we give it as a folic acid supplement, and we do that for one really good reason, and that is if you give enough of it, you'll push through even those categories and you don't get birth defects at the same rate that you would otherwise get. But folic acid is the least useful of all the folates of the various types.
Can they get changed? Can folic acid get converted into the folacin?
Well, it can, but that's where some of those methylation pathways are defective in that. And so even folinic acid, if you've got homozygous varieties of the methylation defects, even folinic acid struggles to get through, but it's closest to the edge. And the 5-methylfolate, the one that we probably ideally like, isn't approved in Australia, and so that's on either prescription or people go online and just bring it in from overseas. We do need a kind of more responsive TGA to actually open up the gates for some of the better nutrient supplements as well.
So where would you avoid the use of certainly folate, folic acid, and what about folinic acid?
Folinic acid's an improvement, but it's still one step before one of the critical conversion pathways. So the end result seems to be the methylated folate to go into the methylation cycle. It works with methylated B12, with B6 and with zinc, and you get glutathione production from that through transsulfation. So there's a whole package of things which are good news for brain inflammation and for nerve inflammation and control of pain that can come from really getting your B12 and your methylfolates right. And it is more art than science. You can do genetic tests, but we still are imperfect in our understanding. So folinic acid is a much, much better solution than folic acid.
Right. So what about things, we mentioned quercetin before, and in my experience, I've used it for quite acute things, traumas, in really high dosages, extremely safely, and so effective.
Yeah, it is.
So effective in an acute sort of What about situation? What about chronic usage, though? Do you tend to, moderate the dosage down to 500 milligrams BD or...
I treat it a little bit, I've got to say, this is a doctor's kind of mindset. I treat it a bit like a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory without the side effects of the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory.
Yeah.
So it's the aspirinless aspirin. But you're right, you can take that up to gram doses very, very easily, and it has a pharmacological action, and you can see the effects on the spot. You see this with allergy patients, managing their allergies when they can't have antihistamines. You can maybe argue it's a lot better for you than taking the antihistamines. I think that's true as well. So yes, it's a useful short-term intervention. And you can take that back very safely to a kind of stable dose of a gram or so a day. And it's easy, cheap and cheerful, and if it controls things, then I don't know of any adverse effects of that. Probably gives better varicose veins, blood vessels, blood vessel quality and collagen quality. So there's other upsides as well.
Have you ever used proteolytic enzymes as an anti-inflammatory? I've used these for transient sort of things, traumas again, but my issue was with compliance. You've got to take them in between meals for them to be effective.
Right. Okay.
And I was always eating.
All right. I have problems with this because the proteolytic enzymes, the ones that we use for digestion,
Yep.
you hope are too big to get across the gut wall. Weirdly, if you've got a leaky gut, they do get across the gut wall, and then they have an action, proteolytic action, which is in the bloodstream. That was always considered a downside. You don't want to be giving foreign protein molecules or pig proteins or anything like that. But I think the answer is the proteolytic enzymes have got an action on the gut that diminishes inflammation, and they may have an activity in the body, and probably more so if the gut's damaged than if it's not.
There's some interesting research looking now at the enteropancreatic recirculation of the plant-based enzymes, and somebody's looking at gluten sensitivities with them. So it'd be interesting to see what the research pans out to be.
Yeah, a lot of research is going on that area. Gluten is keeps on triggering problems, and people keep looking for solutions.
So what about herbs, Mark? Now, I know that you're not a herbalist, and you're quite open about referring on to those who are expert in prescribing herbs, and I really honour you for that. So, but there are a few herbs that are, quite well established in the medical field. They've even got a positive Cochrane collaboration review for lower back pain. That's devil's claw and white willow, particularly.
And there's the same for headaches. There's a lot of different pain syndromes. In fact, the British Medical Journal, I think it was nearly a decade ago, put out a review for doctors of what else can you do for pain. Let's get integrative pain management happening. What's the value? And the high value of complementary medicines. The problem for most of this research is the common one. We'd love to do the research. You've got to find a sponsor who's going to do devil's claw, who's going to do these studies that really we need to know, we really need to have. But you're right. I do refer people on to herbalists, and herbal pain relief is, I think, really, really effective, as is acupuncture. Right? Acupuncture, there's Western herbalists and the traditional Chinese medicine. Acupuncture for adrenals and for pain, I find really, really useful. It's one of those things on my bucket list. Eventually I wish to become an acupuncturist and a herbalist because I think they're really, really fascinating. But magic happens when I refer people out. The diagnostic mindset that I have is not always the same as the herbalist or the acupuncturist. I make the mistake of saying, this is your nerve, and they say it's liver qi. And I think, oh God, how dumb is that? And then once a TCM practitioner said, how good are your drugs at treating liver qi? Well, that's the question, isn't it? You can't treat my disease and I can't treat your disease. That's just a naming issue.
What really interests me about acupuncture is the analgesia couldn't be reversed by Narcan. So it wasn't an opiate type pathway.
Yeah.
And so they're finding it hard to sort of tie it down into a C fibre use or action,
Yeah. It's categorizing things is really difficult if your mindset is already, this is the way things must be going wrong. And the beauty of things like acupuncture, which, dates back to Nixon in the 60s going over there, that's when it kind of became a big thing in Western medical care. But it dates way, way back. Things don't last thousands of years for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah.
And us understanding how it works, I think, is less important than saying, hey, I as a doctor have an effective thing that you can use. I would like you to see the practitioner. I think there's a lot to be said, whether it's psychotherapy or TCM or herbalists, the quality of the person you send a person to is equal to the quality of whatever that technique is. But I'd say the same thing in medicine. There are doctors who want you out the door who are just nasty, and pain relief is never going to happen with those doctors. So there's something of the personal interaction, there's something of the credibility of the person to the person suffering pain, and then there's the tools that those practitioners use. And I think Western herbs, Chinese herbs and acupuncture are really, really good as a trial of treatment, and they work relatively quickly. It's not like 6 months before you know anything's improved. Within the first week, you often find really, really significant benefit.
So tell me about your use with these, medically accepted herbs, shall I say? Do you use things like, devil's claw, white willow?
I do refer on to herbalists. I have a principle here, and that is I'm not trained in herbalism. I even often will put in the person's notes, here's what there's evidence for. Could you go and see a person? So I'm forever ringing an HAA or others who say, who is a good person in this area? But I believe in the practitioner. I truly, truly believe in the practitioner. And I think many of us in integrative medicine think, I've got to integrate it all. And shingles are outside practices all around the lower North Shore of Sydney with doctors who know a chiropractor. And that's their whole link with integrative medicine, or they once had a back pain relieved by acupuncture. I believe that the practitioners need to come up to scratch for doctors to refer to, and doctors need to let go of some of these things so that they hand over to people with expertise and training in the field.
What about your use of, if you wanted one herb or spice that's really on the edge of medical acceptance, that's curcumin.
Right, it is, isn't it? And it's powerful, and it's quick, and it's almost too much like a drug. Initially, you think of this and you think, God, if the inflammation control is that quick, there's got to be something bad about this. But I'm yet to find it. And so generally, when you get these kind of changes that quickly, with omega-3s, you're often waiting 2 to 3 weeks. With glucosamine, you're often waiting that 6 to 8 weeks. You usually have periods of time that things that are effective in the long term don't make such a big impact short term. But curcumin seems almost magical in that way. You get really obvious changes happening in the first week of treatment, sometimes in the first 72 hours. Acute injuries respond really, really well to curcumin. And I'm not used to seeing that. I'm still sitting here thinking there's got to be a study which says, it causes, the brain to collapse after 30 years. But I'm guessing there are cultures around it where the curcumin is so much a part of the intake of the diet that we would have seen the adverse effects if there had been those.
Yeah.
And so I can't really make up my mind about why is this one so clinically effective in the short term that it's medically useful. And doctors who are used to seeing changes within hours to days are not going to be waiting long periods of time feeling like they're doing nothing.
If you follow the work of Bharat Agarwal, for the listeners, it's Aggarwal, B initial, and he's written a plethora of papers with some lovely diagrams. And I think one of the hallmarks of curcumin is that it acts in a mild way on so many different genes and transcription.
And it has impacts on tumour progression, it has impacts on cardiovascular disease, on atherosclerosis, of fatty deposition on arteries. This is what I mean. Some things are just almost too good to be true. And when you've isolated a drug and you say it does all of these things and you give it a name and you patent it, I am always suspicious. The thing that's different here is this is actually the rediscovery of something that has such an incredibly broad range of actions that we're almost struggling to make sense of what it can't do. It has so many parts to play that people with cancer risk should be on it. People with cardiovascular risk should be on it. People who are looking for neuroinflammatory control should be on it. So when you've got something that widespread, I think it's a really, really useful thing. To me, that would compete with magnesium as something that I would do first occasionally and just say, get this into you, find out what the effect is. The reason I don't is I want to know whether the magnesium works. So if you give 2 things to my patients and something works, then the job is stopping one of them because they will stay on it forever after that, once you've got control of pain.
So when you're dealing with your fibromyalgic patients, and they can be quite frustrating patients because this is a recalcitrant condition.
Yeah.
And these patients tend to be their own undoing with their, they've been sick for so long, they've been painful for so long that any day that they have without pain, they go out and do too much.
Spring cleaning.
Tell me how you manage them. Tell me what's your experience with results and how do you get long-term results?
You can't manage that emergence from pain. People are people. If they have not been able to do things, if they're in pain and they've been unable to perform activities, we just simply have to put up with the fact that they will test themselves, they'll fall over, they'll be crook for another 5 days, 2 weeks, 10 days. Sometimes they knock themselves around. I have had people who, within weeks of treatment, are so pain relieved that they try a half marathon, or they'll do a marathon, or they will do something absolutely absurd. But to them, that's the testing of their system.
Yeah.
I don't have any doubt that they're not doing any permanent damage. I don't think there is any damage going on there. I think what they're doing is saying, I want my life back. And people that enthused to do something like that are going to have good outcomes because they will adapt and adapt and adapt. The people who are harder, honestly, are those people who, even when the pain is gone, are too terrified to do anything because they think, if I do anything with my life, I will fall over again.
Yeah.
So we don't want the yo-yoing of people with pain and inflammation and fatigue relieved and now overusing it. We don't want people to be in constant cotton wool sitting in their homes saying, I'm feeling better, but what if I go out?
Yeah.
And so the job then is to be that mentor on both sides to say, look, back it off a little bit. You can do something as long as when you wake the next morning, you don't feel like you've hammered yourself with something. And so that overuse is not on the day. People often experience just elation. They've got the endorphins flowing, they're feeling great.
Yeah.
But the next morning, they feel like they've got the flu. And then 5 days later, they're still recovering. And saying, back off there. Go to about half of what you think you can do and then check the next morning. And if that's too much, go to a half. We'll get there.
Yeah.
But we're not going to get there all in one hit.
So that's the people that go too much. How do you get the people that don't go enough and are too terrified to do anything? How do you encourage them to push a little bit further, to explore again?
That is hard because those are people with high surveillance. They're looking for the next problem that's going to occur. And some people, it takes no time for them to get their confidence back. In fact, they're overconfident, the ones that we just described. The other ones are so terrified of losing the gains that they've made that they don't challenge themselves in life. Eventually, they do come out of their shell. They would argue only a silly person's going to come out of their shell too early because you'll get hammered down. I've been through that 20 times and I'm not going to do it again. Yeah. But the relearning of it is to do simple tasks. People generally will say, I can get 30 metres up a hill. Okay, see if you can go to 40. Yep. See if you can just do that little bit more. See if sitting down for 5 minutes makes a difference. And so the re-encouraging of readoption of life is really useful. Having social support, having other people around who are enthusiastic about recovery, what is also important, because what often happens is these people are sick and they're tired and they're disabled and the family's sick to death of them. And they say, if you just got up and did X or did Y, you'd be better because when I'm tired, that's what I do, or when I'm hungover, that's what I do. And it's a different experience entirely. So engaging the family to say, we've got a strategy, the improvements are going to be there, don't push too quick, but bring them along, start including them in activities. That social repair has to happen. And often, weirdly, it's the abuse of the family. The family's just got sick of a sick person in the family. They wish they'd either die or get better. And there's no place for this person. The family can get enthused about including them back in activities, encouraging them but not demanding of them. And they come out of their shell, and the first times that they actually do things that they didn't think that they could do before, they build confidence. I think that there's value as well to mindfulness and meditation in those areas. You can do mindfulness and learn mindfulness, and that's the experience of experiencing things but not attaching them. And I think that that's where mindfulness and pain relief is really, really exciting. The old cognitive behavioural therapy was a disaster a lot of the time. It's, yes, you think you're in pain, but if you think yourself out of pain, you won't be in pain. And a lot of people would say to the doctor eventually, okay, I did that just to get through it. Mindfulness is different. You can sit there and do something active to pay attention to nothing and to allow the feelings to come and the pain to be there without all the attached emotions that go with it, without the fears. And that detachment under a mindfulness trainer, I think that's a really positive thing. It's arguably one of the first positive things in psychology for the last 50 years is not to go drug-wise and not to go down the paths of beating people back into normality, but allowing them to re-emerge and find their own lives again. And pain-free, those people do a lot better than they do when they're forever in pain.
Mark, once again, I really applaud you, because you don't just treat the patient, you don't just treat the condition, you always treat the person and everything around that encompasses that condition and how it affects things. So, Dr Mark Donohoe, thank you once again.
It's been a pleasure.
This is FX Radio, and I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook.